Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we're talking about social media censorship because it may actually be ramping up soon, and here's what you need to know. Now, before we dive in to the most recent article I'm going to talk about here, let's do once again a quick primer on the current law of the land, which is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. We're talking obviously about the law here in the United States. Now, most people don't realize there are actually two sides of the coin for Section 230. Now, the first side is that it absolves social media platforms in their liability for what their users post outside of things like criminal content, intellectual property laws, state laws that might supersede this or coincide with this, and obviously sex trafficking as well. Now, prior to the Communication Decency Act, Section 230 being put into place, we saw a slew of lawsuits against major platforms at the time, like AOL and Prodigy, as well as other providers, back when the internet was just starting out. Essentially, people would be harassed online, and then they would sue their cyberbully that was harassing them, but then also drag the platform in that was giving the harasser essentially the ability to do this. And so after Section 230, your harasser could still be sued, but it was no longer the liability of AOL, Prodigy, etc. Now, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and on and on and on. If Section 230 did not exist, we would basically have hundreds of millions of users, which we have here in the United States. And again, outside of the United States doesn't count at the moment. Every platform, Facebook, etc., would essentially spend their lives in court adjudicating this because, again, millions of people would be suing millions of other people. We just get mean when we get anonymous online, and that is kind of being facilitated with this. This is why Section 230 is important. This is the positive side of what Section 230 does. It allows us, the users, way more latitude to post what we want because the platforms do not have to police us with a fine-tooth comb. And we will get to the recent events very shortly. But this brings us to the second side, or the other side, of the coin of Section 230. Section 230 does not elevate a platform like then AOL or now Facebook, etc., to the status of a public utility or public forum. Basically, these are private companies that, and essentially in that vein, they have the right to police themselves for content that they don't believe should be on their platforms, and they have the latitude to essentially do it, kill it, and do what they see fit with that. As private companies, their ability to censor as they see fit is absolute. And so when you go and sign up, you are signing up and accepting their terms and conditions, and you are agreeing to abide by those terms and conditions, whatever they say. Now, recently, as I've reported, as has basically everybody on the planet in terms of tech platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc., had clauses in their terms and conditions for years regarding things like cyberbullying, intentional misinformation, also known as disinformation, and more. And in the wake of the January 6th Capitol breach, Facebook, Twitter, and others began enforcing those policies in an attempt, as this is what they say, to start killing off misinformation, disinformation, and cyberbullying as well. Because at that moment in history, this appeared to be asymmetrical in nature due to what was being shared. That gave those on the quote-unquote censored side the ability to claim just that. And that is actually a form of censorship. But here's the thing, and a lot of people don't understand this difference, is that private censorship is not the same as government or public censorship. The government itself, the United States government, has very specific items that it will censor for what it considers public safety, but posting on a government-based forum, so for example, the FCC, when they open up a forum and want comments from the public on, let's say, a proposed law or bill, that is much different than Facebook, because what you can post there is much harsher. It's much not as controlled or monitored like a Facebook would. Facebook can kill whatever they wish, the FCC cannot, and the FCC will not remove posts of any kind unless they fall into those very specific categories, such as crime. Now, Zuckerberg, in that vein, private versus public, Mark Zuckerberg could wake up tomorrow and just feel like banning everybody on Facebook who has a profile picture with glasses, on. So if my profile picture has me in glasses, he could just go ahead and ban me, and that's his right. they actually have that right. A lot of people don't understand that they can do that on a whim. And they're not doing that at that level. They're not doing it that arbitrarily. They are creating reasons for this, as opposed to, I just feel like I hate people with glasses today. But the government, in terms of censorship, cannot do that on their public forums. Facebook is not a public utility. And so that leads us to today's article from Reuters on a new bill that may actually change the scope of what Section 230 is. Now, yesterday, 3 U.S. senators introduced a bill that would limit Section 230 and make the companies more accountable when posts result in harm. This is known now as the Safe Tech Act, and the legislation would mark the latest effort to make U.S. social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, etc., more accountable for, and I quote, enabling cyber stalking, targeted harassment, and discrimination on their platforms. That is in a statement by Senators Mark Warner, Mazie Hirono, and Amy Klobuchar, basically introducing the Safe Tech Act. All three are Democrats. Now, in the aftermath of the January 6th Capitol breach, many lawmakers have been studying ways to hold big tech more accountable for the role that they played in the spread of disinformation before the riot, and also about policing content on their platforms. On the other side of the aisle, several Republican lawmakers have also been separately pushing to essentially kill Section 230 altogether, because essentially they disagree with how Facebook, etc., are moderating their content. Obviously, former President Trump, for example, has repeatedly pushed for Section 230 to be removed because obviously he's alleging censorship as well. And the calls for basically killing that grew on platforms like Twitter and Facebook as they started labeling the former president's posts about the election, and then obviously all of the misinformation as they were labeling it after the Capitol breach, and on and on and on. Now, here's the thing. The chief executives of Google, Twitter, and Facebook have previously said in front of Congress and in other statements that Section 230 is crucial to the free expression that you have on the internet. They said that Section 230 gives them the tools to strike a balance between preserving free speech and moderating content, even though they are appearing to be open to suggestions about how that law may need to change in terms of its moderation. Now, the bill from these three senators would make it clear that Section 230 does not apply to ads or paid content, meaning if you put out an ad or paid content, let's say that incites harm or bullying or a riot or whatever that is, that's not going to, that basically you don't have Section 230 protection, nor do you have it with the enforcement of civil rights. So in other words, it does not impair the enforcement of civil rights on the platform, nor does it bar wrongful death action. So in other words, if you are, let's say, causing wrongful death, you're encouraging somebody to commit suicide, for example, you are still being held liable, which is very similar to the laws we have today, but it would be more pronounced. It would enforce it more in a way that it's not previously enforced without, let's say, a prosecutor having to go through that. Now, if you follow me and you listen or watch my content, with any real, alacrity, if you will, or consistency, you know that I am no fan of Facebook. I even did a video called "It's Time to Put Mark Zuckerberg in Jail." I have serious problems with Facebook and their data mining, not to mention other platforms for similar issues. But in this case, I actually happen to agree with the leadership of Twitter, Facebook, etc. Section 230 does actually give them the tools to try and strike that balance between preserving free speech and moderating content. It is not perfect. There are going to be mistakes. And when we are looking at a politically divided situation, if your side of the aisle is on the wrong side of it in that issue, and let's say the next time it's the other side, that may be a problem. But if we simply kill Section 230, then to basically avoid millions of lawsuits from millions of users complaining about another set of millions of users, the Facebooks of the world will have to clamp down hard. Section 230 basically says, I can post, hey, you're a stupid idiot, and here's what I think. And as long as I am not saying I'm going to drive over to your house and shoot you, or I'm not telling, let's say, a Facebook group of 10,000 people to arm up and go storm a building, I am very much well within my rights. Now, where this cut off or where this was different was that Facebook and Twitter were saying we have a set of demonstrably false information that is amping up the situation, that is basically amping up those that may eventually convert into an intent to do harm. And so they took that one step forward. And so if you think that last round of them attempting to kill off that misinformation and disinformation was bad, that is going to be kindergarten compared to essentially the filtering that they're going to have to do. I get called out all the time on social media. This video/podcast, people will tell me, Nick, you're an idiot, and here's why. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But when you say, Nick, I'm going to come over to your house and shoot you, or something like that, you are then crossing a line. We can have a debate. The problem is that a lot of people just are really angry about these kinds of things. So it's usually not a debate. It's usually pointing fingers, calling one another morons, or a hell of a lot worse. And to underscore this point, even Parler, their recently now former CEO, basically saw this writing on the wall as these legislations are starting to be passed. And he even talked to Parler's board, which is essentially what got him ousted, about filtering extremism on Parler, just like Facebook and Twitter. And so that then opens up the question of what exactly is free speech. Now, we can talk about what discrimination is, as Senators Warner, Hirono, and Klobuchar talked about, what is and is not discrimination, what is and is not free speech. So, for example, as I mentioned yesterday in a video or a couple of days ago, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that obviously is intent to do harm. That is disinformation. Essentially, you can't lie. And so when we have demonstrably false information, is the person actually lying, or do they believe it and they're simply trying to alert the world to this? There is a huge gray area here. We can debate that all day long, but if we kill Section 230 without replacing anything, be prepared to have way more people banned, punted, temporarily blocked, filtered, denied access, whatever that is, because they're going to have to. So until that happens, we need to work within the confines of Section 230, and you can have your opinion. I have plenty of friends that disagree with me or think A and I think B. That is fine. I don't like them any less. I hope they don't like me any less for disagreeing with them. We can have that debate, but when it moves into something else, that's a problem. And so here we are. So I think that if they actually start limiting this, or they start capping Section 230, all we're doing is going to be turning up that private base, not government base, that private base censorship, and that is on them. Meaning the senators that are going to pass this, then the House that would potentially pass this, and a president that would sign it into law, and then it's on the private company that will censor us in general. So I think this is a very important topic. I think this needs to be debated. Obviously, no law is perfect. Section 230 is by no means perfect, but without it, we're in a much worse spot than we are. And the last thing we want to go back to is the absolute headaches that AOL had prior to the 1996 Communications Decency Act, because everybody was suing everybody, and nobody wants that except possibly the lawyers. And that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.